Hello and welcome. There is a lot to talk about today. This is probably going to be a little bit of a longer review, but we're talking about Magnus Protocol Episode 19, Hard Reset. I have thoughts about that name as well, but we're going to come back to it. Before we get into our case number here, just a quick... we're going to be talking about some things in this episode that I've been saving for the ARG breakdown, which again, we're still going to be doing. We'll be doing that during the break, which will happen after next week. But, oh boy. The case number for this episode is CAT 13R BC1 137-2103-1684-1104-2024. Transformation canine. Growth crystalline. So before we get into it, this episode has a couple of very important people in it from history in our world. Their stories seem to be a little bit different in this world, which excites me. But I want to mention, I have done extensive research long before I ever listened to Magnus on a few of these people, because I love the study of Hermeticism. I love the study of alchemy. I love the ideas behind all of that. And I love digging into that, right? And I don't bring this up all the time because it doesn't apply most of the time, but I also love studying theology, which is very important for a couple of the people that have been mentioned here. So we're going to get into all of that, and I'm going to nerd out a little bit more today than I normally do, because today we get to talk about Robert Boyle, Robert Hooke, Isaac Newton, Albertus Magnus, and, Homberg. So, okay. Yeah, I'm going to hold it in. We're good. This episode starts with Celia studying up on alchemy, which should have been a give me right away that was coming up, right? But Sam tries to tell her that he's done. He doesn't need to look any more into the Institute. He thinks he's okay. He thinks he's done now. And of course, Celia shows him, I guess, that he's not done. She's kind of shocked at first, and then when she's like, well, if I find anything about the Institute, should I just not show it to you? And he pulls the old, well, I wouldn't say that, Either way, that's all well and good. Let's get to the case. Okay. I did so much digging to make sure that I was right, because I studied specifically Boyle. I love Robert Boyle. He's the father of chemistry, right? I studied him as one of my big final projects in high school, and I wrote a paper on Boyle and Hooke and Newton and about what science was like at that time and what we could learn from science at that time compared to what we have now. Not saying what we have now is bad. It's just the way that they worked together despite very many disagreements was wonderful and amazing. That's not quite what we're seeing here. So in history, Boyle and Newton didn't always get along, right? But Boyle respected Newton, and we see that here. And in history, Hooke and Boyle got along fairly well, but Hooke and Newton didn't get along very well at all. And then something happens. A lot of people believe, I'm one of those people, that believe that it is when Boyle's research showed that the Earth was probably older than the Bible seemed to say that it was, and it led to a lot of disagreements. Now, Hooke was very ardent about how he wasn't saying the Bible was wrong. He just believed that, maybe we understood it differently, but Boyle took it as he was saying the Bible was wrong, and Newton took it as, maybe there's more we can dig into there, and it caused a schism between them as far as we can tell. And I'm trying not to just nerd out here, because the fact that this is a case from Robert Hooke to Robert Boyle about what Isaac Newton has done, and it still ties back into the theological roots with the tree and the fruit. Just geniuses. How did you pull this off? I'm knocking stuff over. I'm so excited. I was blown away at how masterfully all this is tied in, because there's so many references. Somebody did their research, is what I'm saying, and it makes me so happy, as I love this era of history so much, and just getting to see it represented in Magnus, which is something I already love. I'm trying not to nerd out. We need to get into the actual episode itself, but it is going to be important, the things that I mentioned, as we move into this, because there are divides here, but the divides here aren't caused by theological disagreements. The divides here are caused by something very different. So, our case, as I said, is to Robert Boyle of the Royal Society, from Robert Hooke, also of the Royal Society, 2 fellows of the Royal Society, and Isaac Newton was also a fellow. In fact, in our world, Isaac Newton, for a short time at least, was the president of the Royal Society. Hooke mentions how Newton has gone too far, and that they need to enact the protocol to stop the dread. And protocol and dread are capitalized. And Hooke then goes into how he knows that when Boyle wanted to enact the protocol before, that he was resistant to it, that he held back from it, but that the protocol was needed to stop the spread of the disease in London. So right off the bat, the Magnus Protocol is not just the name of the series. Obviously, we knew it would be important, right? Magnus Archives was the archives, the archivist. The protocol is an actual thing. It is a thing that you can do. We believe, or at least I believe, that the OIAR is now capable of enacting the protocol, right? The protocol, from the way they talk, is much older than they are. It's something that they've had forever, which leads me to believe, especially with how much alchemy is brought in here, and we know alchemy is brought in with the symbol for the OIAR. It has the alchemical symbols for salt and for mercury in there, but not sulfur, which is really interesting because of the triumph. And that's going to be important in a minute with Newton. Look, there's so much here, okay? And if I seem frantic, it's because I'm trying to parse all of it, not just in my mind, but also to be able to convey it to you. If this protocol is an older thing, and we're going to see from what Hooke says later about Newton, it can change people. It can pull people back from the brink, and as long as you don't remind them of what they've done, or you keep them away from what they've done, then it has changed them. It has fundamentally changed them. And I can't help but wonder if the protocol is not dimension hopping, right? If it's when the fears were pulled through, was it actually because of everything that John and Elias had done, or was it also because the protocol was enacted somewhere else in a different world? Anyway, before we get too far down that train of thought, the protocol is old. And I believe, this is just a me theory, right? But I believe that this is not Jonah Magnus that has started anything up here. It is Albertus Magnus, the alchemist. And that's where the Magnus Protocol comes from. Albertus the Great, Albertus Magnus, Saint Albertus. He was an alchemist. He very publicly stated that he had witnessed lead being turned into gold, and that he was searching for the Philosopher's Stone. A lot of people believe that he gave it to his student, Thomas Aquinas. Whether Thomas Aquinas was ever actually a student, I don't know if it's ever actually been proven, but supposedly he gave the Philosopher's Stone to his student, Thomas Aquinas, right before his death. But Thomas Aquinas died before Albertus Magnus did, in our time anyway. Things could be different here. Look, I deep dove here, okay? I'm trying to stay calm, but even to the point of, hey, hold on, wasn't there an alchemist named Khalid? What is it, Khalid? I have it written down here so that I wouldn't make this mistake live like I'm doing right now. Khalid ibn Yazid, and Sam's last name is Khalid. And then, of course, you know, we have Colin, which is Becker is his last name, right? Like Joachim Becker. I'm sure there's some more in there as well. I think Edward Kelly Dyer, something like that, also was an alchemist, but I'm not positive on that. That's another thing that I want to like dig deeper into, but I already spent... Okay, I'll peel back the veil here. I know I'm getting frantic. It's Magnus. Normally, I listen to the episode right when it comes out on Patreon, and I record the episode right afterwards, and then I edit it all together, throw it up on YouTube, put it unlisted, usual stuff. Today, it is currently almost 8 hours after the episode came out, because I started listening to it, and I took extensive notes and dug back up and went through all of my own paper that I wrote way back when, and going through pages upon pages of research, trying to make sure that I was right on these men and what I thought about their history, double checking all of it. So when we get into the ARG, we'll do the full breakdown of, like, is there connections between each character and a famous alchemist? We'll do all of that then. But I wanted to go ahead and record this because it's eating me up inside not to talk about it. So, I didn't even get to dread. What is the dread? Is that the fears? Is that the entities? And I have another theory on that as we talk about alchemy, where have the fears been broken up into the 22 alchemic symbols? Because some of the alchemic symbols are about the wildness of man, and about the water, and about the earth, and about the air, and specifically, which one is it? I've got it written down so I wouldn't forget here. Phosphorus has the ability to capture light and create darkness. There's so much. There's so much. We're going to need a full separate video just to cover the alchemy side of Magnus, which has been there the whole time because the ARG. But as I mentioned, I've been digging deeper into getting the ARG stuff ready, and it's what led me to have all this stuff already set up on my computer for research and to be able to dig through. And then we got an episode on Isaac Newton and alchemy, and we couldn't wait to talk about the alchemy stuff any longer. It has to be talked about now. Anyway, Hook had hoped they would never need to use the protocol against Isaac Newton, because clearly Newton was studying vegetative propagation of metals, and they were hoping that would be good enough, that he would stay on a track of good science, which was a phrase very commonly used in their day, science that God would approve of, right? And I tried really hard to find anything about Newton's research on the vegetative propagation of metals, and I couldn't find anything. So I think this is definitely a Magnus thing that led him down this train as compared to the apple tree and gravity, right? But Hook goes to his house, and there's a stunted dog that tries to nip at his heels, and he gets in there. I say his house. It's not his house. I'm so sorry. It is the college. It's Trinity College, which is very important because that is the actual campus that in Cambridge that Newton taught at in our world, and he's also very important for Newton's theological stance that we'll get into in a minute when we get into the apple and what Newton says. But he sees this huge great flask, and in this flask is a tree, and it's floating in an element of overwhelming radiance. And this tree is metallic in nature. It's a mineral, right? But Newton goes on to tell him that he has perfected the work of Wilhelm Homberg, also known as Guillaume Homberg, in the Arbor Philosophorum Perfecta. And I apologize already for my pronunciation. I never did well in Latin in school, but I did try. There is a really wonderful mention here. By the way, when we talk about Homberg, we don't know a ton about Homberg's research. He wrote Fontenelle, which was the Éloge de Monsieur Homberg. I cannot speak French, and I apologize for my terrible pronunciation. But for the most part, he was an alchemist and a chemist. He did some very interesting stuff with boracic acid. Somebody, the comments are going to have a field day with this one. Boracic acid. I don't know why I'm having so much trouble with that, but I can say stuff like kunkel. Anyway, he was a part of the East India Trade Company, which so was Isaac Newton. So very interesting there. Specifically, he was an officer of the Dutch version of that, and as I said, he was an alchemist. The Arbor Philosophorum perfecta seems to be the idea of taking a mineral and converting it to a living tree. And when Hooke talks about how beautiful it is, Newton says, as are all of the Lord's living works, because it is alive inside this fluid and it produces fruit. And this is when Newton says, as he takes the flask from the vial, this is when he says, I'm not going to attempt to read it in Latin. Jonathan Sims did a wonderful job reading it in Latin. This is when he says, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, thou shalt not eat of it. For in the day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die. Which is a quote from the book of Genesis. It's specifically about Adam and Eve being warned not to eat of the fruit, mostly Adam, being warned not to eat of the fruit because it would reveal the truth to him, which was that all things must die, right? That the world is not perfect, and it would be the first sin, and it would, go down that whole train of thought there. Now, we have to very briefly, and many of you will probably be very bored by this, but we need to talk about where Newton stood on theology, because Newton's stance on theology was very unique, not just for his time, but even still today, because Isaac Newton believed in God, right? He taught theology in many ways, but he believed in a lack of the Trinity. He believed God was in two parts, and that the third part was for us to fill, right? Not to become gods, but to serve. He believed in God the Father and God the Son, who was subservient to God the Father, and then we were subservient to God the Son, as that being a true Trinity. Now, obviously, if you know anything about theology, the standard biblical teaching is that God is one in three, which is God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. Newton obviously didn't share those beliefs very publicly, but he wrote about them in letters, and after his death, he was raked across the coals for it in a lot of theological circles. I find it really interesting that Isaac Newton, the man who believed that we would be subservient to Christ and that completed the Trinity, has now made another tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Just the idea that it would be the guy that thinks, of course, we complete this process, that is like, yeah, and now it's my turn to make this thing. Just, again, for many of you at home, that won't matter at all. But out of all of the alchemists they could have chosen, they choose the guy that absolutely said, we are the third part. Just the level of research they put into this is crazy to me, and it blew me away. I was slack-jawed. This is my favorite episode of Magnus Protocol so far. I'm sure there are things like this that I didn't catch for previous episodes that you at home did, and we're like, oh man, this is the greatest. They put so much research into it. But just, I love it. I love it so much. Anyway, I'll get off my high horse here, and we'll talk about the episode. I'm still talking about the episode, I guess. But anyway, he drops a drop into the dog's mouth from this vial. And when he does, the dog doesn't seem to be affected at first. And then it sits down and its fur extends and it starts to take root into the ground. And when it opens its eyes, they shine with the same light as what the tree is shining with. And Hooke knows deep within his soul that this dog knows him, that it doesn't see him now as a man and it as a dog, but it sees them as an equal, as it knows the truth between good and evil. It is, in many ways, the secret of life itself. To know is to live, and it is the Philosopher's Stone in that way, even if it's not quite the original use case that it was intended for. And what has this done? Is this why the man became a tree in, what was it, episode 4? Episode 5? I'll find out real quick. It immediately took me to this tree. In episode 3. It was episode 3, putting down roots. Is this why? Was it because of this liquid and this is the corruption? Knowledge is the corruption? There could be so many things that could come from this. Does this even still exist today? Did they do a protocol on Isaac Newton? Did they stop him before this spread out? What exactly, how much did that dog know in that instant? Did it just know what Hook was able to take in? That the dog and it were now on the same level where the dog knew everything that people can know? Or is it that it learned the truth of the universe? Just immediately got so excited, right? I love this. So then when Hook goes to kill it, because of course he does. That's the first reaction this man has is, oh, this dog knows me on a level no other dog could. Time for it to die. Newton drops another solution on it, and it goes back to normal like nothing happened. I assume he's tested this a few times. Newton jokes that maybe Hook should take a couple moments away to breathe and consider this great thing that he's made. And Hook flees the scene and immediately writes out this letter to Boyle saying, hey, we need to enact a protocol for good science. And if all that was all we got from the episode, that'd be one thing, right? I've already been going for 23 minutes and we're not even close to done. I'll probably cut down some of the rambling. But then we get Sam worried the computers are listening because all the cases come through lately for him are about the Magnus Institute or Magnus Archives or Magnus Protocol. But also one thing I wanted to point out here that I should have pointed out earlier is normally these old cases are read out by Augustus, but this one is read out by John. It's very interesting. Then we get Gwen saying that she wants security, she wants Starkwell, she knows the OIR has worked with Starkwell before, and she wants Starkwell to back her up, and Lena shuts her down and reminds her that, you know, Gwen's family could probably find her a better job, and also that Lena herself has done this many times without needing security, and that Starkwell would probably just get her in more trouble anyway. And then we get the final big bombshell, right? Where this is where everything just all collides together for me with my theories. And I probably should have saved the theories to talk about till now, but it's fine. Alice goes to see Colin. Colin says they can't let him know how much they know. He says that he is watching, doing Mommy and Daddy Stacy proud. Okay. We'll get into the other thing he says in just a minute, but the Stasi is the secret police of East Germany. Specifically, I'm gonna listen to this one more time to make sure I try to say it right. My German is not great. The Ministerium für Staatssicherheit. So, this means there's definitely a German that is watching them, right? That's obviously the reference he's making there. First, I thought Klaus, right? Well, maybe Klaus is watching. No. I think instead, this is Albertus Magnus, that was a German man that has found the Philosopher's Stone. He has eternal life. That has perfected alchemy. And whether he's perfected alchemy by binding the entities, the fears, to allow him to do so, or whether he's perfected alchemy some other way, I do not know. But this is, in my opinion, this is Albertus Magnus. And the reason I say that is because right after, Colin mentions that as long as the balance is kept in balance, it doesn't matter. Too much mercury, or else the world ends. Too much sulfur, or else we all go mad. Sulfur and mercury, obviously, alchemical. They're very important to it. Sulfur, I've got them pulled up here just to make sure I wouldn't get any of these wrong. Sulfur is the male alchemical symbol, dryness, heat, masculinity, and it represents the soul. And Mercury is the female symbol. It is the mind, as well as a state that could transcend death. So, another interesting little thing to point out, Isaac Newton, after he died, was found to have had mercury in his hair, and a lot of people think that it was mercury poisoning that killed him. Alchemists did a lot with mercury and with sulfur. There's a lot about sulfur that is very cool, and the way that it's been used in stuff afterwards is very cool, but alchemically, sulfur is very important. It's interesting that salt isn't mentioned here, but it could just be that Colin didn't get the chance to mention it, because again, these are the Tria Prima, the 3 primes, which Trinity. There's a lot going on here, is what I'm saying, and I think it all ties back into Albertus Magnus. I think that ultimately he is the one that's pulling the strings here. Did Albertus Magnus and Jonah Magnus combine somehow? Are they alternate dimension versions of each other, and they reached out to each other across time and space? I have no idea. Is the web just pulling Albertus Magnus's strings? This one has been such a ramble. I feel so bad for people that are used to like normal comprehensive reviews, but there was just too much talk about, too much to try and tie in for this one episode. We're definitely going to have to go back and do some more later, but I am all in on this. The fears have been tied in to the alchemy. Maybe they're bound to an alchemic symbol each, and we're going to see how it goes from there. You know, I am fully, my theory this whole time has been it's fractured, and the fears have fractured off. I don't think they did that by choice. I think they were bound either by the laws of this world when they came to it, or by Albertus Magnus himself. Just, there's so much, man. One thing, real quick. I took a minute, and I didn't want to end this episode, so I'm cutting this in here. I took a minute, and I looked up the other main members of the cast and famous alchemists, and I found a blog. I'll include a link to it. It's a Tumblr blog in the comments, or in the description, I mean, and it's from Annabelle Kane. Yeah, you heard me right. And it says specifically that all of the OAR employees, with the exception of Gwen and Teddy, appear to have surnames based on known alchemists. It mentions Sam with Khalid Ibn Yazid, Alice Dyer, Edward Dyer. I was right on that one. Colin Becker is Johann Joachim Becker. Celia Ripley, George Ripley, and Lena Kelly, Edward Kelly, which was a mistake I made earlier with Edward Kelly Dyer when I said that. So, yeah, just, I'll include that in the description. I just didn't want to leave that loose thread. I felt bad when I went to go edit it, and I was like, this was kind of important, so I cut it in there. But I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on this one. If you care at all about any of the stuff I was talking about with alchemy or with the theology and how interesting it all ties in together, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you don't think any of that matters at all, well, I get that. I understand that I've dug a little bit deeper than maybe I needed to, but I don't think so. I think I needed to dig this deep. I think there is a lot more that I could have gleaned. I still feel like I'm missing something with Holberg and the Arbor Philosophorum Perfecta. I still feel like there's something there. And just again, the chills that ran down my spine when Isaac Newton read off, "But of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, thou shalt not eat of it. For in the day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die." I loved this episode. This episode made me more excited for Protocol than anything else has, even though I loved Protocol already. I'm listening to a lot of horror stuff lately. I'm trying to expand my horizons, right? I'm listening to Malevolent. I've got a couple others that I don't want to talk about until I'm a few more episodes in, but Protocol has just seized me now and made sure that it's my favorite. Because if you told me when I started the Magnus Archives that we were going to at some point be talking about Robert Boyle, Thomas Aquinas, two of my personal heroes, I would not have believed you. I would never have believed that. But here we are. And so, yeah, I went a little deeper than maybe I needed to. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. And until next time, I've been Trey. This has been the Full Spectrum. Remember to always enjoy the full spectrum. Magnus Protocol. That stuff.